Before we dive into today's story, don't forget to like and subscribe to support the channel. It helps us continue creating these cinematic storytelling videos.
A mafia boss kissed his mistress in front of everyone. His wife smiled. 3 days later, he owned nothing. If you want to know how a woman brought down an empire without firing a single shot, stay until the end. Drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The crystal chandelier caught the light wrong. That was the first thing Alessia Moretti noticed when she stepped out of the limousine, how the refraction seemed off, like the whole building was trying too hard to shine. The Celestine Grand Hotel had hosted presidents, tech billionaires, and at least 3 arms dealers who'd made the Forbes list under creative accounting. Tonight, it was hosting the annual Corvo Foundation Gala, which was just a fancy name for what it really was, a place where powerful criminals pretended to be philanthropists for 6 hours while their lawyers took notes. Alessia's heels clicked against marble that probably cost more than most people's houses. She didn't rush. Rushing suggested nervousness, and nervous people got eaten alive in this world. Her dress was black, not the sexy kind of black that screamed for attention, but the kind that suggested you didn't need to scream for anything. It fit her like a threat, elegant, severe, the kind of outfit that made people step aside without knowing why. A young valet, maybe 22, stumbled over his own feet trying to open the door for her. "Ma'am, Mrs. Moretti, breathe," Alessia said. Her voice was calm, almost kind. "You'll live longer." He blinked at her like she'd just performed a magic trick. She walked past him into the lobby, where the real performance had already begun. The Corvo Gala wasn't about charity. It was about territory. Every handshake was a negotiation. Every smile was a calculation. The people here moved money that could collapse governments, and they did it while discussing wine pairings and their kids' college essays. Alessia had been coming to this event for 7 years, ever since she'd married Victor Moretti and become the wife of one of the most feared men on the eastern seaboard. She'd learned quickly that being feared and being powerful weren't the same thing. Fear was loud. Power was silent. She moved through the crowd like water, present but untouchable. A few people nodded at her. Most looked away. That was fine. She preferred it. Near the bar, she spotted Carmelo Ricci, a 70-year-old with knuckles like walnuts and a reputation for solving problems with car batteries. He raised his glass slightly when he saw her. "Mrs. Moretti?" "Mr. Ricci. Your husband around?" "I'm sure he'll make an entrance," Alessia said. Carmelo's eyes crinkled, but it wasn't quite a smile. "He usually does." She didn't respond to that. She didn't need to. Across the room, near the orchestra that was playing something classical and forgettable, she saw Delilah Crane. Delilah was old money trying to cosplay as New Danger, a venture capitalist who'd made a fortune in crypto and then diversified into things that required offshore accounts and lawyers who didn't ask questions. She wore red, which was predictable, and diamonds that were probably conflict-free only in the legal sense. Delilah saw her and waved, which was bold considering Delilah had been sleeping with Victor for the last 4 months. Alessia waved back. The trick to surviving in this world wasn't ignorance. It was knowing exactly what was happening and deciding what to do about it. Alessia had known about Delilah since week 1. She'd known about the girl before Delilah too, and the one before that. Victor had a type, young, hungry, impressed by his power. He cycled through them like subscription services. Alessia could have stopped it. A word in the right ear, a transaction that suddenly went wrong, a rumor planted in the right circle. Any of it would have ended the affairs quietly. But she hadn't, because Victor's arrogance was useful. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, didn't drink it, just held it, and made her way toward the main ballroom. The gala had a program, speeches, an auction for art nobody actually wanted, and then dancing that would last until people got drunk enough to say things they'd regret in the morning. She checked her watch, 10:42. Right on schedule, the murmuring started. It began near the entrance, a ripple of attention, heads turning, voices dropping to whispers. Alessia didn't turn around. She didn't need to. Victor had arrived. Victor Moretti was the kind of man who entered rooms like he was owed them. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that looked good in photographs and better in shadows. He wore his tuxedo like armor, and he moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in a way that mattered. And on his arm, laughing too loud at something he'd just said, was Delilah Crane. The room went quiet in patches. Not all at once. That would have been too obvious, but enough that the absence of sound became its own kind of noise. Alessia took a sip of champagne. It tasted expensive and pointless. Victor saw her from across the room. For a second, just a second, something flickered in his expression. Not guilt. Guilt required introspection, and Victor had never been good at that. It was closer to acknowledgement, like he'd remembered she existed and was deciding whether that mattered. Delilah saw her too. The actress, because that's what she was, technically, though her IMDb page was mostly bit parts and a commercial for teeth whitening, went stiff, her smile freezing into something plastic. Alessia didn't look away. She just stood there, holding her champagne, waiting. Victor made his decision. He walked toward her, Delilah still attached to his arm like a very expensive accessory. People parted. Of course they did. Nobody wanted to be in the blast radius. When he reached her, Victor smiled. It was the smile he used in negotiations, confident, borderline cruel, the kind of smile that said he'd already won and was just being polite by pretending otherwise. Alicia? Victor, you look beautiful. I know. His smile twitched, just barely. Delilah cleared her throat, a little too loud. Hi, I know who you are, Alessia said. She didn't say it meanly. She said it the way you'd tell someone the time. Delilah's mouth opened and closed like a fish that had just realized the tank was smaller than advertised. Victor's hand tightened on Delilah's waist. Not possessive, just steadying, like she might bolt. Delilah and I were just discussing the auction, Victor said, his voice smooth. There's a Rothko up tonight. Thought I might bid on it. You hate Rothko, Alessia said. People change. No, Alessia said. They don't. For a moment, the three of them stood there in a triangle of expensive clothing and unspoken violence. Around them, the gala continued. Waiters circulating, conversations humming, the orchestra transitioning into something vaguely Viennese. Then Victor leaned in, close enough that Alessia could smell his cologne, something woody and aggressive that cost $400 an ounce. Don't make a scene, he said quietly. Alessia looked at him, really looked at him. At the man she'd married 7 years ago in a ceremony that had cost more than some people made in a lifetime. The man who'd promised her the world and delivered a gilded cage. The man who thought power meant being loud. I never do, she said. And then she walked away. She didn't storm off. She didn't throw her drink. She just turned, glass still in hand, and moved back into the crowd like nothing had happened. Behind her, she heard Delilah whisper something urgent and nervous. She heard Victor laugh, low, dismissive, the kind of laugh that said he'd just won something. He hadn't. He just didn't know it yet. Alessia found a corner near the auction display, a quiet spot where she could see the room but wouldn't be easily approached. She set down her champagne on a table next to a sculpture that looked like someone had welded anger into bronze. Her phone buzzed. She pulled it out. The screen showed a message from a number she didn't have saved. Confirmation received. Phase 2 is active. She deleted the message and slipped the phone back into her clutch. Across the room, Victor was holding court near the bar. He had an audience now. 3 men in expensive suits who laughed at his jokes and nodded at his opinions like he was dispensing wisdom instead of recycled lines from Forbes articles. Delilah stood next to him, smiling, playing the part. She was good at that, playing parts. It's what actresses did. Alessia wondered if Delilah understood what she'd walked into. Probably not. Girls like that thought being on a powerful man's arm meant they had power. They didn't realize they were just props. She'd learn. The auction started at 11:15. A man in a suit that fit too well took the stage and began rattling off descriptions of paintings and sculptures that nobody in the room actually cared about. People bid anyway, because not bidding suggested you couldn't afford to, and in this world, appearing broke was worse than being broke. Alessia didn't bid. She watched. Victor bid on the Rothko. Not because he wanted it, but because someone else wanted it, and outbidding them was a power move. He won it $640,000. Delilah clapped like he'd just cured cancer. At 11:30, the speeches started. A city councilman took the stage and thanked everyone for their generous contributions to the community. He didn't mention that half the donations were laundered through shell corporations, or that the Corvo Foundation's biggest expenditure last year was legal fees. Then came a tech CEO who'd made billions selling data and called it innovation. Then a philanthropist whose family money came from mining operations that had killed approximately 200 workers over 3 generations. Alessia listened to all of it with the detached interest of someone watching a documentary about a species that would eventually go extinct. At midnight, the music shifted. The orchestra packed up, and a DJ took over, younger, louder, designed to make rich people feel like they were still relevant. People started dancing. Victor danced with Delilah. He held her close, closer than he needed to, closer than was appropriate for a man whose wife was 30 feet away. His hand rested on the small of her back, proprietary and obvious. Delilah laughed at something he said, her head tilting back, her hair catching the light. And then Victor kissed her. Not a peck, not an accident, a real kiss, the kind that made a statement, the kind that said, "I don't care who's watching." The DJ kept playing. The bass thumped, but the people nearby stopped dancing. They stared. Victor pulled back, grinning, and Delilah looked up at him like he'd just given her the world. Across the room, someone whispered, "Jesus Christ." Someone else said, "Where's his wife?" Alessia was exactly where she'd been for the last 20 minutes, standing near the sculpture, holding a fresh glass of champagne she hadn't touched. She didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't react. She just watched. Carmelo Ricci appeared next to her, his face carved from stone and disapproval. "You want me to handle this?" he asked quietly. "No." "Alessia, I said no." Carmelo looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once and walked away. On the dance floor, Victor was still holding Delilah, still grinning, still playing to an audience that didn't know whether to applaud or run. And then the doors opened. Not the main doors, the side entrance, the one used by staff and people who didn't want to be seen. A woman stepped through. She was in her early 30s, dark hair pulled back, wearing a dress that was elegant without trying to be. She moved with the kind of precision that came from years of practice. Not hesitant, not rushed, just deliberate. She was flanked by 2 men in dark suits who weren't trying to look like bodyguards, but absolutely were. The room noticed her immediately. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned, because everyone knew who she was. Alessia Moretti. Except, Alessia was already in the room. Wasn't she? People looked from the woman near the sculpture to the woman who'd just entered, their brains trying to reconcile the impossible. And then they realized. The woman near the sculpture, the one who'd been standing there for the last hour, wasn't Alessia. It was her sister Francesca. Similar build, similar face, similar enough that in low light, with champagne and distraction, people saw what they expected to see. The real Alessia Moretti walked into the ballroom like she owned it. Because she did. She didn't rush, didn't storm toward her husband. She just moved through the crowd with calm, terrifying precision, and people moved out of her way without being asked. The DJ cut the music. The silence was absolute. Victor saw her. His grin faltered just for a second before snapping back into place. Delilah saw her. Delilah went pale. Alessia stopped 10 feet from them. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Alessia smiled. Not a warm smile. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile that said, "Checkmate." "Hello, Victor," she said. Her voice was calm, even, like they were discussing dinner plans. Victor let go of Delilah and straightened, his expression shifting into something harder. "Alessia, I didn't realize you were coming." "I'm sure you didn't." He laughed, short, dismissive. "Look, if you're going to make a scene, I'm not. Then maybe we should—" "I'm not making a scene, Victor." Alessia took a step closer. "I'm making a statement." The room held its breath. Victor's jaw tightened. "And what statement is that?" Alessia glanced at Delilah, just for a second, then back at her husband. "That you're done." Victor laughed again, louder this time, trying to regain control. "Done? Alicia, you're upset. I get it, but I'm not upset." "This doesn't have to be—" "I'm not upset, Victor," Alessia said again, her voice cutting through his like a blade. "I'm relieved." That stopped him. She turned, addressing the room now, her voice carrying effortlessly. For those of you who don't know, my husband and I have been quietly separating our interests for some time now. Business has been complicated. Tonight just makes it official. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Victor stared at her. What the hell are you talking about? Alessia ignored him. I'll be managing the Eastern operations moving forward, she continued. Victor will focus on his other ventures. Alessia, it's cleaner this way, she said, turning back to him. For everyone. Victor's face darkened. He stepped toward her, his voice dropping to a growl. You don't get to decide that. I already did. You don't have the authority. I have all the authority, Victor. Alessia's smile didn't waver. I just let you think you did. For a second, Victor looked like he might hit her. Then Carmelo Ricci cleared his throat. The old man stepped forward, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. She's right, Carmelo said. Victor turned to him. What? The Eastern operations, the accounts, the shipping routes. Carmelo shrugged. It's all hers. Has been for a while. Victor's eyes went wide. You're lying. I'm not. Carmelo, you work for me. I work for the family, Carmelo said. And the family works for whoever's smart enough to run it. Victor looked around the room, his confidence cracking, searching for allies. Nobody met his eyes. Delilah, still standing on the dance floor, looked like she wanted to melt into the floor. Alessia stepped closer to Victor, her voice soft now, almost gentle. You built an empire on fear, Victor. But fear is expensive. It requires constant maintenance, constant violence. She paused. I built mine on something simpler. What? Information. Victor stared at her. I know where every dollar goes, Alessia said quietly. I know every deal you've made, every mistake, every enemy. I know who's loyal and who's just scared. I've known for years. Victor's hands clenched into fists. You're bluffing. Am I? She pulled out her phone, tapped the screen twice, and held it up. On the screen was a photo. Victor and a man named Paulo Reyes, taken 6 months ago in a warehouse on the docks. Paulo Reyes worked for the Salinas cartel. Victor had sworn to the other families that he'd cut ties with them. He hadn't. Victor's face went white. That's just one, Alessia said. I have 43 more. Different deals, different lies. She put the phone away. So here's what's going to happen, she said. You're going to walk out of here tonight. You're going to enjoy your girlfriend. And you're going to stay very, very quiet. And if I don't, Alessia's smile was almost sad, then everyone in this room finds out exactly how much you've been stealing from them. The silence that followed was suffocating. Victor looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in their marriage, he saw her clearly, not as his wife, not as an accessory, as a threat. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it. He turned and walked toward the exit, his movements stiff, his shoulders tight. Delilah hesitated, then followed him, her heels clicking too loud against the marble. The door closed behind them. Alessia stood in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by the most dangerous people on the East Coast, and nobody said a word. Finally, Carmelo raised his glass. To new leadership. One by one, the others raised their glasses too. Alessia didn't smile. She just nodded. And somewhere, in the back of her mind, she heard the first click of a lock falling into place. The game had begun. The ride back to the penthouse was silent, except for the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the driver's radio. Alessia sat in the back seat, hands folded in her lap, watching the city blur past the tinted windows. Francesca sat beside her, still wearing the black dress she'd used as a decoy, scrolling through her phone with the kind of focus that suggested she was doing more than just checking Instagram. They're already talking, Francesca said without looking up. Let them. Victor's people are scrambling. 3 calls to Carmelo in the last 10 minutes, 2 to DeMarco. DeMarco won't answer. He did. 3rd ring. Alessia glanced at her sister. And? Told them he's staying neutral until the dust settles. Francesca locked her phone and looked out the window, which means he's waiting to see who wins. Smart. Also cowardly. Same thing, Alessia said. The car turned onto Fifth Avenue, where the buildings stretched up like glass teeth and the streetlights painted everything in shades of amber and cold white. At this hour, the city felt empty in the way expensive places always did, populated but hollow, full of people who didn't really live there, just passed through on their way to somewhere else. Francesca shifted in her seat. You think Victor will actually stay quiet? No. Then why let him walk out? Alessia didn't answer right away. She watched a couple stumble out of a bar, laughing too loud, holding on to each other like the sidewalk might disappear. Because broken men do stupid things, she said finally. And stupid things are useful. Francesca nodded slowly, like she'd just watched someone solve a math problem she hadn't quite figured out yet. The penthouse was on the 43rd floor of a building that didn't have the name on the outside because people who needed to know already knew. The elevator opened directly into the apartment. No hallway, no neighbors, just a private entrance that required 3 different key codes and a thumbprint scanner that Alessia had installed herself. Inside, the space was cold. Not temperature cold, the heating worked fine, but the kind of cold that came from things being too clean, too organized, too much like a showroom, and not enough like a home. White walls, black furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows that turned the city into wallpaper. Francesca kicked off her heels and walked straight to the kitchen, pulling a bottle of wine from the rack without asking. She poured 2 glasses, slid one across the marble counter toward Alessia, and drank half of hers in one go. You want to tell me what Phase 2 actually is, or are we still pretending I don't need to know? Alessia picked up the glass but didn't drink. You'll know when it matters. I was your body double tonight. I think it matters. You were insurance, Alessia said, in case Victor showed up early and I needed time. Insurance, Francesca repeated. She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. You know, most sisters ask each other to help move furniture. Maybe water some plants. Most sisters aren't us. Yeah, lucky us. Francesca finished her wine and poured another glass. She was younger by 3 years, 31 to Alicia's 34, but she carried herself like someone who'd already lived twice and was trying to figure out if a third round was worth the effort. She had the same dark hair, the same sharp features, but where Alessia had learned to smooth her edges into something cold and controlled, Francesca had kept hers jagged. You're going to burn it all down, aren't you? Francesca asked. No. Liar. Alessia set down the glass. I'm not burning anything. I'm taking what's mine. Semantics. Strategy. Francesca shook her head. You know what the worst part is? I actually believe you'll pull it off. I already have. The phone on the counter buzzed. Not Alessia's. Francesca's. She glanced at the screen, frowned, and answered. Yeah? Alessia watched her sister's face shift, neutral to focused in half a second. When? Francesca asked. Then, after a pause, how many? Another pause. Don't touch anything. I'll call you back. She hung up and looked at Alicia. Victor just walked into the Northside warehouse. He's got 8 guys with him, maybe more outside. Alicia didn't react. Doing what? Pulling inventory, cash, product files, anything that isn't bolted down. Let him. Francesca blinked. Let him? He thinks he still has access. Let him think that for another hour. Alessia, if he clears out that warehouse, he won't get far. Francesca stared at her, then muttered something in Italian that was definitely not a compliment. She grabbed her phone and typed out a message, her thumbs moving fast. Alessia walked over to the windows and looked out at the city. Somewhere down there, Victor was loading boxes into trucks, thinking he was salvaging something, thinking he still had control. He didn't understand yet. Control wasn't about what you could take. It was about what people thought you could take. Behind her, Francesca put down her phone. You're scary, you know that? Good. I'm serious. Sometimes I look at you and I don't even recognize. Then don't look. The words came out sharper than Alessia intended. She didn't turn around. Francesca was quiet for a moment, then, I'm going to bed. Try not to overthrow any governments while I'm asleep. No promises. She heard her sister walk away, heard the guest room door close with a soft click. Alessia stayed at the window. She pulled out her phone and opened an encrypted app that didn't have a name, just an icon that looked like a black square. Inside were messages from people who didn't exist on paper: contractors, accountants, fixers, all of them connected to her through layers of shell companies and offshore accounts so deep that even the IRS would need a map and a prayer. One new message. Shipment delayed. Port Authority flagged container 4478. Rerouting through Baltimore. Alessia typed back. Acceptable. Confirm new ETA. The response came 30 seconds later. Wednesday, 0400 hours. She locked the phone and slipped it into her pocket. The problem with empires, real ones, not the kind built on ego and violence, was that they required constant maintenance. You couldn't just take power and expect it to stay. You had to feed it, adjust it, make sure every piece was still in place. Victor had never understood that. He thought being loud was the same as being strong. He thought fear equaled loyalty. But fear had a shelf life. Eventually, people got tired of being scared. They got resentful, sloppy. Alessia had spent 7 years watching him make the same mistakes over and over, and every time she'd quietly fixed them. Rerouted shipments when he pissed off the wrong supplier. Smoothed over deals when his temper cost him leverage. Paid off cops, judges, city councilmen, anyone who could make problems disappear. Victor thought he was untouchable. He was, because she'd made him that way. And now she was going to take it back. Her phone buzzed again. Different app this time, just a standard text. Unknown number. We need to talk. Alessia stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it. 3 seconds later, another text came through. I know you're awake. She almost smiled. She typed, you have 2 minutes. The response was immediate. Not over text, in person. No. Alessia. 1 minute left. A pause. Then, the Elysian, room 804 tomorrow, noon. Alessia didn't respond. She locked the phone and set it on the counter. The Elysian was a boutique hotel in Midtown, the kind of place that catered to people who wanted discretion more than luxury. She'd been there twice before. Once for a meeting with a banker who'd helped her set up accounts in the Caymans. Once to deliver an envelope full of cash to someone who'd made a problem go away. Whoever had just texted her knew that, which meant they knew more than they should. She poured herself a glass of water, drank half, and left the rest on the counter. Then she walked to her office, a small room off the main living area that was just a desk, a chair, and a wall of filing cabinets that were mostly empty because everything important lived on encrypted servers in 3 different countries. She sat down and opened her laptop. The screen came to life, showing a dashboard that looked like something out of a heist movie. Live feeds, financial trackers, communication logs, all of it updating in real time. She clicked on one of the tabs. Moretti Enterprises, Asset Overview. The list that appeared was long. Warehouses, shipping routes, front companies, real estate holdings, offshore accounts, cryptocurrency wallets. And at the bottom, a single line, liquid assets under direct control, $847 million. Victor thought he had billions. He had debt. Alessia had spent the last 3 years quietly moving money out of his reach, slowly enough that he wouldn't notice, quickly enough that by the time he did, it would be too late. She'd sold properties he didn't know she had access to, liquidated investments he'd forgotten existed, transferred funds through so many shell companies that even a forensic accountant would need a PhD and a bottle of aspirin to trace it. And the whole time she'd kept the empire running, kept the shipments moving, kept the bribes flowing, kept the whole machine humming along like nothing had changed. Because nothing had. Victor had always been the face. She'd always been the brain. She just hadn't told him. A notification popped up in the corner of the screen. New activity. Warehouse 12. She clicked it. The feed showed grainy security footage from inside the North Side warehouse, the one Victor was currently raiding. She could see him in the frame, barking orders at men in black jackets who were hauling boxes toward a loading dock. She zoomed in. The boxes were labeled textiles. They weren't textiles. Alessia opened another tab and typed in a command. 2 seconds later, a new window appeared, A live tracking map showing the location of every vehicle in Victor's fleet. 3 trucks were currently parked outside the warehouse. She clicked on the first one. VIN 1 HGBH 4 1 JXMN 109186. Registered owner, North Star Logistics LLC. Current. Cargo. Flagged. Flagged. That was the word she'd been waiting for. She picked up her phone and sent a single text to a number she'd memorized years ago. Now. 3,000 miles away, in a port city where the authorities had long since stopped asking questions they didn't want answers to, a customs officer received an anonymous tip. Container 4478 wasn't the only shipment being rerouted tonight. Alicia closed the laptop and stood up. She walked back into the living room, past the windows with their view of the city that never quite slept, and stopped in front of a painting on the wall, an abstract piece that Victor had bought at an auction because someone told him it was valuable. It wasn't, but the wall safe behind it was. She moved the painting aside, entered the code, and opened the safe. Inside were 3 things: a passport with a name that wasn't hers, a handgun she'd never fired, and a single USB drive. She took the drive. Then she locked the safe, replaced the painting, and went to bed. The next morning came too bright and too early. Alicia woke at 6, showered, and dressed in a charcoal suit that made her look like she was on her way to fire someone, which, in a sense, she was. Francesca was already awake, sitting at the kitchen island with a cup of coffee and her laptop open. "Victor's having a bad morning," she said without looking up. Define bad. 3 of his trucks got pulled over on the interstate. State troopers found 80 kilos of uncut product and $500,000 in cash. Alicia poured herself coffee. "Where?" "Jersey, just over the bridge." "Who tipped them?" "Officially?" Anonymous call. "Unofficially?" Francesca looked up. "You tell me." Alicia sipped her coffee. It was too hot, but she didn't care. "Is he in custody?" "No, he wasn't in the trucks, but the drivers were his guys. Carlo Brenza and Tommy Nix. They'll talk. Not if they're smart." "They're not smart," Alicia said. "That's why Victor hired them." Francesca smirked. "You're in a good mood." "I slept well." "Liar." Alicia finished her coffee and set the cup in the sink. "I have a meeting at noon. I'll be back by 2. "Where?" "Out." "Helpful." Alicia grabbed her coat and headed for the door. "Alicia," Francesca called after her. She stopped, turned. "Be careful," Francesca said. "Please." Alicia nodded once, then left. The Elysian Hotel was smaller than she remembered, tucked between a dry cleaner and a Thai restaurant that had probably failed 3 health inspections. It looked like the kind of place people went when they didn't want to be found. Perfect. She walked through the lobby, narrow, dimly lit, decorated in a style that could generously be called vintage and more accurately be called hasn't been updated since 1987, and took the stairs instead of the elevator. Room 804 was at the end of the hall. She knocked twice. The door opened. Standing on the other side was a man she hadn't seen in 4 years. Marco Delgado. He looked older, grayer, thinner in the face, like he'd stopped eating regularly and started drinking instead. But his eyes were the same, sharp, calculating, the kind of eyes that saw 3 moves ahead. "Alicia." "Marco." He stepped aside and she walked in. The room was exactly what she'd expected, small, clean, anonymous. A bed that hadn't been slept in, a chair by the window, a bottle of whiskey on the desk with 1 glass. Marco closed the door and locked it. "You want a drink?" "No." "Suit yourself." He poured himself 2 fingers and drank half in one go. "You look good." "You don't." He laughed, short, bitter. "Yeah, well, exile doesn't agree with me." "You weren't exiled, you left." "Semantics." Alicia crossed her arms. "Why am I here, Marco?" He set down the glass and looked at her. Really looked at her. "Because you're making a play," he said. "And I want in." She didn't react. "I'm not making a play." "Bullshit. Victor's empire is falling apart. His guys are getting arrested. His shipments are disappearing. His accounts are drying up." Marco stepped closer. That's not bad luck. That's strategy. Maybe he's just bad at his job. He is, but he always has been. The difference is, now nobody's covering for him. Alessia met his eyes. And you think that's me? I know it's you. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Marco smiled. Not a happy smile, but the kind you gave when you realized you were right about something terrible. I helped you set up the offshore accounts, he said quietly. The ones in Grand Cayman. The ones Victor doesn't know about. Those accounts don't exist. They do. And they're worth about 800 million, give or take. Alicia's expression didn't change. You're guessing. I'm not. Then you're bluffing. Am I? Marco picked up his glass again but didn't drink. 4 years ago you came to me. You said you needed to move money. Quietly. Safely. You said it was for insurance. I believed you. And you helped me. I did. Because I trusted you. Because I thought... He stopped, shook his head. Doesn't matter what I thought. What do you want, Marco? He drained the rest of his whiskey and set the glass down hard. I want back in, he said. I want a seat at the table when this is over. There is no table. Alessia. There's no table, Marco. There's no empire. There's just business. Then let me help you run it. She studied him, the desperation in his voice, the way his hand shook just slightly when he wasn't holding the glass. You've been gone 4 years, she said. Why now? Because I'm broke. Because I'm tired. Because I made bad bets and worse friends, and now I've got nothing. He laughed again, but this time it sounded like something breaking. I need this, Alessia, please. She wanted to feel sorry for him. She didn't. You helped me once, she said. I'm grateful, but that doesn't mean I owe you a future. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for a job. No. Alessia, no, Marco. Her voice was firm, final. Go home. Stay quiet, and maybe I'll forget you were here. He stared at her, his face cycling through anger, desperation, and finally something that looked like resignation. You've changed, he said quietly. Everyone does. Not like this. Alessia walked to the door, then paused with her hand on the knob. If you talk, she said without turning around, if you tell anyone what you know, about the accounts, about any of it, I'll make sure you disappear. I'm not threatening you, Marco. I'm telling you what will happen. She opened the door and walked out. Behind her, she heard the glass hit the wall and shatter. She didn't look back. By the time Alessia got back to the penthouse, the news was everywhere. Not the mainstream news. Nothing about Victor Moretti would ever make CNN or The Times unless someone died spectacularly, but the kind of news that mattered in their world. The kind that traveled through encrypted messages and hushed phone calls in back rooms. Victor's trucks had been seized. His drivers were in custody. And the state troopers who'd pulled them over hadn't just stumbled onto the bust. They'd been waiting, tipped off, prepared. Francesca was pacing when Alicia walked in. Phone pressed to her ear, her free hand gesturing like she was arguing with someone who couldn't see her. I don't care what he thinks he can do, Francesca was saying. Tell him if he moves $1 more without clearing it through me first, I'll personally make sure his next shipment ends up in a fucking evidence locker. She listened for a second, then her face went hard. Then he can explain to Carmelo why we lost the Baltimore route. Another pause. Yeah, that's what I thought. She hung up and threw the phone onto the couch. Victor's trying to liquidate, she said. He's calling in favors, pulling cash from every account he can access, and moving product through secondary channels. Alessia set down her bag. How much has he moved? Maybe 2 million. Most of it's already flagged. By who? Us. Francesca grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge and twisted the cap so hard it cracked. I've got people watching every account he touches. The second he tries to wire anything, we reroute it. He'll notice. He already has. He called me 20 minutes ago, screaming. Alessia raised an eyebrow. What did you tell him? That his accounts were frozen pending an internal audit. Standard procedure after a federal bust. And he believed you? No, but he couldn't prove otherwise. Francesca took a long drink, then wiped her mouth. He knows something's wrong. He just doesn't know what. Alessia walked over to the windows and looked out at the city. It was early afternoon, and the streets below were packed with people who had no idea what was happening 43 floors above them. People with normal problems. Traffic. Rent. Whether to get pizza or Chinese for dinner. She envied them sometimes. Not often, but sometimes. How long until he figures it out? Alessia asked. Depends on how paranoid he's feeling. Could be today. Could be next week. Francesca came to stand beside her. But once he does, he's going to come after you. Hard. Let him. Alessia. Let him, she said again. Angry men make mistakes. Francesca was quiet for a moment, then sighed. You're really doing this. I already did it. No, I mean, you're really going to take everything. Alessia didn't answer. Because the truth was, she wasn't taking everything. She already had it. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat at her desk with the laptop open, watching the numbers change in real time. Accounts shifting, money moving, the empire breathing. At 2 a.m, her phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. Victor's at the Sapphire Club. Drunk, loud. You should know. She stared at the message, then typed back. How loud? Throwing glasses? Yelling about his wife. Security's getting nervous. Alicia deleted the conversation and closed her eyes. The Sapphire Club was one of Victor's places, a high-end lounge in the financial district where brokers and bankers went to pretend they were mobsters, and mobsters went to pretend they were legitimate. It was all dark wood and leather booths and bottles of scotch that cost more than most people's car payments. Victor owned a piece of it, or used to. Alessia had sold his stake 3 months ago to a shell company she controlled. He didn't know that yet either. She grabbed her coat. Francesca was asleep in the guest room, and Alessia didn't wake her. This wasn't something that required backup. This was something that required presence. The drive to the Sapphire Club took 15 minutes. She parked 2 blocks away and walked the rest, her heels clicking against pavement that still smelled like rain even though it hadn't rained in days. The bouncer at the door recognized her immediately. He was young, maybe 25, with the kind of build that came from a gym membership and a protein shake addiction. Mrs. Moretti, he said, stepping aside before she even reached the door. She nodded and walked in. Inside, the club was exactly what she expected. Low lighting, too much cologne, a DJ playing something with a bass line that probably sounded better if you were high. And in the corner, surrounded by half-empty bottles and people who looked like they were being paid to laugh at his jokes, was Victor. He'd lost his tie somewhere. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, and his hair, usually slicked back with the kind of precision that required a barber and a small fortune, was a mess. He looked like a man unraveling. Alessia walked toward him, and the crowd parted without her asking. Victor saw her before she reached the table. His face went through about 6 different emotions in 3 seconds. Surprise, anger, something that might have been shame, and then back to anger. Well, well, he said, his voice too loud. Look who decided to show up. The people around him went quiet. Alessia stopped a few feet away. We need to talk. Do we? Victor picked up a glass, whiskey, probably, and drank half of it. Because I've been doing plenty of talking, all day, to cops, to lawyers, to guys who work for me who suddenly don't seem to know who the fuck I am. Victor, you know what's funny? He stood up, swaying just slightly. I spent the last 12 hours trying to figure out what the hell is happening, and you know what I realized? Alessia didn't answer. It's you. He pointed at her, his hand shaking. It's been you this whole time. You're drunk. I'm not that drunk. You're embarrassing yourself. Victor laughed, loud and bitter. Embarrassing myself? Alicia, you stood in front of 200 people and told them I was done. You think I give a shit about embarrassment? The music kept playing, but nobody was dancing anymore. Everyone was watching. Alicia kept her voice calm. You should go home. This is my club. No, she said. It's not. Victor blinked. What? You sold your stake 3 months ago to a company called North Star Holdings. I didn't. You did. You just didn't read the paperwork. His face went pale. You're lying. Alessia pulled out her phone, tapped the screen a few times, and held it up. On the screen was a signed contract, Victor's signature at the bottom, along with a notary seal and a date from early September. He stared at it. I never signed that. You did. You were closing the deal on the dockside property. This was part of the package. I would have remembered. You were distracted, Alessia said. You had other things on your mind. She didn't say Delilah's name. She didn't need to. Victor's hands clenched into fists. You tricked me. I gave you an opportunity to read what you were signing. You chose not to. He took a step toward her, and two men in dark suits appeared out of nowhere, blocking his path. Not Victor's men, hers. Victor looked at them, then at Alessia, and something in his expression shifted. Not quite fear, more like recognition. Who are you? He asked quietly. I'm your wife. No. He shook his head. No, you're something else. Alessia didn't respond. She just turned and walked toward the exit. Behind her, she heard Victor yell something, incoherent, desperate, but she didn't stop. Outside, the air was cold and clean, and she stood on the sidewalk for a moment, just breathing. Her phone buzzed. Another unknown number. He's going to come after you. She typed back, I know. The response came immediately. You ready for that? Alessia looked up at the building, at the lights spilling out onto the street, at the city that never quite stopped moving. Yes. The next day started with a phone call Alicia didn't want to take. It came at 7 a.m, while she was drinking coffee and reading through a report Francesca had sent her about Victor's remaining assets. The number wasn't saved, but she recognized it. Carmelo Ricci. She answered. It's early. We need to meet, Carmelo said. His voice was rough, like he'd been smoking since 1972 and hadn't stopped. Today. Where? Pier 17, 10 o'clock. Come alone. He hung up before she could argue. Alicia stared at the phone for a moment, then set it down. Across the kitchen, Francesca looked up from her laptop. Trouble? Maybe. Want me to come with? He said alone. Since when do you listen to what men tell you to do? Alessia almost smiled. Since it's Carmelo. Francesca frowned. You trust him? No, but I respect him. That's not the same thing. It's close enough. Pier 17 was on the east side of the city, where the waterfront still smelled like diesel and dead fish, and the buildings looked like they'd been assembled from spare parts. It wasn't the kind of place tourists went. It was the kind of place things got unloaded in the middle of the night and nobody asked questions. Alessia arrived at 9:55. Carmelo was already there, standing near the edge of the pier with his hands in his pockets, staring out at the water like it owed him money. She walked up beside him and waited. You know why I wanted to meet here? Carmelo asked without looking at her. Because it's loud, hard to bug. Smart girl. He turned to face her. You're tearing Victor apart. He's doing that himself. Don't play games with me, Alessia. I've been in this business since before you were born. I know what a hostile takeover looks like. She met his eyes. Then you know there's no point in pretending otherwise. Carmelo studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Fair enough. So let's talk plainly. You've got the money. You've got the infrastructure. You've even got some of the loyalty, but you don't have all of it. Not yet. And you won't. Not while Victor's still alive. Alessia didn't flinch. Are you asking me to kill him? I'm asking what you're planning to do with him. Remove him. That's vague. It's intentional. Carmelo sighed and pulled out a pack of cigarettes. He lit one, took a drag, and blew smoke toward the water. You want my advice? Do I have a choice? No. He tapped ash onto the pier. Victor's loud, always has been. That's useful sometimes, keeps people scared, keeps them in line, but loud only works if you've got the muscle to back it up. And right now, Victor's muscle is walking away. I know. So here's the problem. You take Victor out, quietly, publicly, doesn't matter, and you're going to have a vacuum, and vacuums get filled. Usually by people who think they're smarter than they are. Like who? Like Paulo Reyes. Like the Salinas cartel. like every two-bit hustler who thinks a power shift means opportunity. Alessia crossed her arms. What are you saying? I'm saying you need to move fast. You've got maybe a week before people start making plays, and when they do, you better be ready to shut them down hard. I will be. Carmelo looked at her, his eyes sharp despite the smoke. You really think you can hold this together? Yes. Why? Because I already have. He smiled, just barely. You know what the difference is between you and Victor? Tell me. Victor thought power was about being feared. You know it's about being necessary. He dropped the cigarette and crushed it under his heel. That's why you'll win. You sound certain. I am, but I'm also old, and old men don't like uncertainty. He looked at her. So I'm asking, are you in control or are you winging it? Alessia didn't hesitate. I'm in control. Good, because if you're not, a lot of people are going to die, and I'm too tired to bury anyone else. He turned and walked away, his footsteps heavy on the wooden planks. Alessia stayed at the edge of the pier, watching the water. Control. That's what everyone wanted to know, whether she had it, whether she could keep it. The truth was more complicated. She had built the foundation. She had moved the money. She had secured the roots and the contacts and the leverage. But foundations weren't empires, and leverage only worked if people believed you'd use it. Victor had ruled through fear and volume. Alessia was going to rule through silence and precision. But first, she had to make sure there was nothing left for Victor to rule. That afternoon, 3 things happened in quick succession. First, a federal judge issued a warrant for the seizure of assets tied to Victor's shipping company. The warrant was based on evidence provided by an anonymous source, evidence that showed a pattern of money laundering and racketeering going back 5 years. Victor's lawyers tried to block it. They failed. Second, a fire broke out at one of Victor's warehouses in Queens. The official report would later call it an electrical malfunction. The unofficial report, passed through back channels by people who knew better, said it was arson. Nobody was inside when it happened, but $2 million worth of product went up in smoke. Third, and most importantly, 4 of Victor's top captains, men who'd been loyal to him for over a decade, stopped answering his calls. They didn't defect. They didn't make a big announcement. They just went quiet. And in their world, silence was an answer. Alessia watched it all unfold from the penthouse, sitting at her desk with 3 monitors running different feeds. Financial reports, security footage, encrypted messages from people whose names she'd never say out loud. Francesca came in around 4 carrying takeout containers that smelled like Thai food. You need to eat, she said, setting one of the containers in front of Alessia. Not hungry. Eat anyway. You're no good to anyone if you pass out. Alicia opened the container, pad thai, extra peanuts, and picked up a fork. She ate mechanically, not tasting anything, her eyes still on the screens. Victor's falling apart, Francesca said, sitting down across from her with her own container. Faster than I thought he would. He was never as strong as people thought. Maybe. But you're pushing him hard. He pushed first. Francesca twirled noodles around her fork. You know he's going to retaliate, right? He's not just going to disappear quietly. I know. And when he does, it's going to get messy. Alessia set down her fork and looked at her sister. It's already messy. Messier, then. I can handle messy. Francesca didn't look convinced, but she didn't argue. They ate in silence for a while, the only sound the hum of the monitors and the distant noise of the city outside. Then Francesca's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, frowned, and stood up. I need to take this. She walked into the other room, her voice dropping to a murmur. Alessia went back to the screens. One of the monitors showed a live feed from a camera outside Victor's apartment building, a high-rise in Tribeca with a doorman and a lobby that looked like a museum. She'd had the camera installed 6 months ago, just in case. Victor hadn't been home in 2 days. The other monitor showed financial activity, transactions, wire transfers, account movements. Most of it was flagged. Most of it was going nowhere. But one transaction stood out. A wire transfer from one of Victor's offshore accounts, one Alessia didn't control, to an account in the Bahamas. $5 million. She clicked on it, pulled up the details. The receiving account belonged to a company called Apex Solutions. Alessia had never heard of it. She ran a search. Nothing came up. She ran another search, deeper this time, through databases that weren't exactly legal to access. Still nothing. Whoever owned Apex Solutions had gone to great lengths to stay hidden, and that meant they were dangerous. Alessia leaned back in her chair and stared at the screen. Victor was moving money to someone she didn't know, someone with resources, someone with enough power to stay off the grid. This wasn't just desperation. This was a plan. Francesca came back into the room, her face tight. "We have a problem," she said. Alessia didn't look away from the screen. "I know." "No, a different problem." Francesca set her phone on the desk. "That was DeMarco. He just got word that someone put a price on your head." Alessia's stomach went cold. "How much?" $2 million. "Who?" "He doesn't know. But whoever it is, they're serious. They've already reached out to 3 different contractors." Alessia stood up. "Did any of them take the job?" "Not yet, but it's only a matter of time." For a moment, Alessia just stood there processing. Someone wanted her dead. It could be Victor, probably was. But it could also be someone else. Someone who saw her rise as a threat. Someone who wanted to stop her before she consolidated power. She walked over to the window and looked out at the city. 43 floors below, people were going about their lives. Walking dogs, hailing cabs, arguing over parking spots. None of them knew that somewhere in that same city, someone was planning her murder. "What do you want to do?" Francesca asked quietly. Alessia turned around. "Double the security, lock down the accounts, and find out who owns Apex Solutions. And if it's Victor?" Alessia's expression hardened. "Then we move to the endgame." The endgame started with a phone call Alessia made at 3 in the morning. She'd been awake for 22 hours, running on coffee and the kind of adrenaline that came from knowing someone out there was willing to pay $2 million to watch you stop breathing. Francesca had fallen asleep on the couch around midnight, laptop still open on her chest, and Alessia had covered her with a blanket before returning to her desk. The number she dialed belonged to a man named Jonas Crew. She'd met him once, 4 years ago, at a conference in Monaco that was ostensibly about international finance but was really about how to move money without governments noticing. Jonas was a fixer, not the kind who solved problems with violence, but the kind who solved them with information. If you needed to know who owned a shell company in Singapore or which politician had offshore accounts in Luxembourg, Jonas was the person you called. He answered on the second ring. "Do you know what time it is?" His voice was thick with sleep and annoyance. "I need information," Alessia said. "Of course you do. Everyone needs information at 3 in the morning." She heard rustling, probably him sitting up in bed. "This is going to cost you." "I know. Double your usual rate." "Fine." That woke him up. "Must be important." "Apex Solutions," Alessia said. "Registered in the Bahamas. I need to know who owns it, who runs it, and what they do." Jonas was quiet for a moment. "That's going to take time." "You have 6 hours." "Alessia, 6 hours, Jonas. Or I find someone else." He sighed. "Send me what you have." She hung up and forwarded him everything she'd pulled on Apex Solutions, which wasn't much, just the account number and the transaction record. Then she sat back and waited. Waiting was the hardest part. It always had been. When she was a kid, her father used to take her fishing before he died in a car accident that probably wasn't an accident, and he'd always said the same thing: patience catches more than skill. She'd hated that advice then, still hated it now, but she'd learned to use it. At 4:30, her phone buzzed, text from Francesca, who'd apparently woken up. "You're still awake, aren't you?" Alessia typed back. "Yes." "You need to sleep." "Later." "You said that yesterday." Alessia didn't respond. A few minutes later, Francesca appeared in the doorway, wrapped in the blanket like a very annoyed ghost. "You're going to burn out," Francesca said. "I'm fine." "You look like hell." "Thanks." Francesca walked over and sat down in the chair across from Alessia's desk. "When's the last time you ate something that wasn't coffee?" "I had pad thai." That was 8 hours ago. Then I'm ahead of schedule. Francesca didn't laugh. She just looked at Alicia with the kind of expression that suggested she was weighing whether to argue or give up. She gave up. What are we doing, Ritzes? Francesca asked. Waiting. For what? Information. About Apex? Alessia nodded. Francesca pulled the blanket tighter around herself. You think it's Victor? Probably. And if it's not? Then we have a bigger problem. They sat in silence for a while. Outside, the city was starting to wake up. Garbage trucks rumbling, early commuters shuffling toward subway stations, delivery drivers double parking and swearing at traffic that didn't exist yet. At 6:15, Alessia's phone rang. Jonas, she answered. Tell me. Apex Solutions is a front, Jonas said, his voice clipped and professional now. It was set up 3 months ago by a lawyer in Nassau named Richard Pembroke. Pembroke specializes in offshore structures for people who really don't want their names attached to anything. Who hired him? That's where it gets interesting. The money came from a trust based in Liechtenstein. The trust is managed by a firm called Halo Partners, which is itself owned by another shell company, which is owned by another trust, and so on. It's Matryoshka dolls all the way down. Jonas, I'm getting there. I followed the chain as far back as I could, and eventually it leads to a private equity group called Silver Lake Capital. Alessia's stomach dropped. Silver Lake? You know them? She did. Silver Lake Capital was one of the biggest players in the Underworld's gray economy, the space between legal and illegal where money got cleaned and politicians got bought. They funded everything from real estate developments to arms deals, and they did it with the kind of discretion that made the CIA look chatty. And they were run by a woman named Margot Castellane. Margot was old money, old power, and old grudges. She'd been in the game longer than most people Alicia knew, and she had a reputation for being patient, ruthless, and impossible to read. Alessia had met her once, at a charity auction 2 years ago. They'd exchanged pleasantries, talked about art, and never mentioned the fact that they were both criminals. Alicia? Jonas's voice pulled her back. You still there? Yeah. There's more. Silver Lake recently acquired a majority stake in 3 of Victor's remaining assets: shipping routes, warehouse leases, and a logistics company called Redline Transport. Alessia felt the pieces click into place. Victor hadn't just moved $5 million to a random account. He'd sold himself to Margot Castellane. When did the acquisition happen? Alicia asked. 2 days ago. The same day Victor had gotten drunk at the Sapphire Club. The same day his empire had started collapsing in earnest. He hadn't been flailing. He'd been making a deal. Thanks, Jonas, Alessia said. You want my advice? No. I'm giving it anyway. Whatever you're planning, be careful. Margot Castellane doesn't lose. She's been doing this since before you were born, and she's got resources you can't even imagine. I'll keep that in mind. Alicia, she hung up. Francesca was staring at her. What is it? Victor made a deal with Margot Castellane. Francesca went pale. Margot? The Margot? Yes. Why the hell would she work with Victor? He's a sinking ship. Because she's not working with him, Alessia said. She's buying him, or what's left of him. Francesca stood up, the blanket sliding off her shoulders. If Margot's involved, this just became a completely different game. I know. Alessia, Margot doesn't just play to win, she plays to own. If she's backing Victor, it's because she sees an opportunity to take over everything, not just his assets, but yours too. Then we move faster. How? We're already moving at full speed. Alessia stood up and walked over to the window. The sun was starting to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and gray that looked almost beautiful if you ignored the fact that the city below was waking up to another day of chaos. We make Victor irrelevant, Alicia said. We're already doing that. No, we're dismantling him. That's not the same thing. She turned to face Francesca. Dismantling takes time. Margot has time, but irrelevance is instant. Francesca crossed her arms. What are you saying? I'm saying we stop fighting Victor and start ignoring him. We take everything he has left, not piece by piece, but all at once. And we do it publicly. How? Alessia pulled out her phone and started typing. Within an hour, the wheels were in motion. First, she called a meeting. Not just any meeting, a summit. The kind of gathering that only happened when something major was shifting in the Underworld's tectonic plates. She sent invitations to 12 people: Carmelo Ricci, DeMarco, 3 shipping magnates who controlled the eastern ports, 2 money launderers who'd been in the game since the 90s, a arms dealer named Constantine who had connections in Eastern Europe, a tech entrepreneur who specialized in cryptocurrency and didn't ask questions, and 2 others whose names didn't matter as much as their influence. The message was simple. Emergency meeting, tonight, 8 p.m., Pier 17. Attendance is not optional. She didn't mention Victor. She didn't have to. Second, she activated a plan she'd been holding in reserve for 3 months. There was a data cache, a digital vault containing every financial transaction, every deal, every secret Victor had tried to bury over the last decade. Alessia had been building it slowly, pulling information from hacked emails, intercepted phone calls, and documents Victor's own people had leaked to her without knowing it. The cache was devastating. It showed money laundering, fraud, bribery, ties to cartels, arms dealers, and politicians who'd built their careers on being clean. And it was all verifiable. Alessia had been saving it for the right moment. This was the right moment. She uploaded the cache to a secure server and sent access codes to 3 journalists, 2 who worked for major newspapers, and 1 who ran an investigative blog that had broken more corruption stories than the FBI. The journalists didn't know who she was. They just knew someone had handed them a gift. By noon, the first story would break. By evening, Victor's name would be radioactive. Third, she made a call to Margot Castellane. It was a gamble, a big one, but Alicia had learned that sometimes the best way to handle a predator was to look them in the eye and make them reconsider whether you were prey. The phone rang 4 times before Margot answered. Alessia Moretti. Margot's voice was smooth, cultured, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who'd been educated at boarding schools and had never worried about rent. I was wondering when you'd call. You know why I'm calling? I can guess. Then let's skip the pleasantries, Alessia said. You bought Victor's assets. I acquired certain holdings, yes. Why? Margot laughed, soft, genuinely amused. Because they were available, and because I don't like leaving money on the table. You're not getting what you paid for. Is that a threat? It's a fact. Victor doesn't own those assets anymore. I do. There was a pause. Then Margot said, legally, the paperwork suggests otherwise. Legally, the paperwork is about to become irrelevant. How so? By tonight, Victor Moretti will be the subject of federal investigations in 3 states. His accounts will be frozen, his properties will be seized, and anyone associated with him will be under a microscope. Another pause, longer this time. You leaked the files, Margot said. I did. That's bold. It's necessary. Margot was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her tone had changed, less amused, more calculating. You've put me in an awkward position, Alessia. You put yourself there when you backed Victor. I backed an opportunity. You backed a mistake. Perhaps, Margot sighed. So what do you want? Are you calling to gloat, or are you calling to negotiate? Neither. I'm calling to offer you a way out. I'm listening. Walk away from Victor. Publicly distance yourself from him. And I'll make sure your name doesn't show up in any of the investigations. And in return, you stay out of my territory. Margot laughed again, but this time it sounded more like a calculation than genuine humor. You're asking me to abandon an investment. I'm asking you to cut your losses. And if I don't, then you'll spend the next 6 months explaining to federal prosecutors why Silver Lake Capital was funneling money to a man who's about to become the face of organized crime in the Northeast. Silence. Then, you've thought this through. I have. And you're confident you can pull it off. I already have. Margot was quiet for a long time. Alessia could almost hear her thinking, weighing options, calculating risks. Finally, Margot said, You're more interesting than I gave you credit for. Is that a yes? It's an acknowledgement. I'll consider your offer. You have until tonight. That's not much time. It's all the time you have. Alicia hung up. Francesca, who'd been listening from across the room, let out a breath she'd been holding. That was insane, Francesca said. That was necessary. You just threatened Margot Castellane. I gave her an option. Same thing. Francesca ran a hand through her hair. What if she doesn't take it? Then we deal with her too. Alicia, one problem at a time, Francesca. The rest of the day passed in a blur of phone calls, messages, and preparation. Alessia coordinated security for the meeting, confirmed attendance, and made sure every detail was locked down. At 2 in the afternoon, the first news story broke. The headline read, Shipping magnate Victor Moretti linked to offshore money laundering scheme. By 3, the story was everywhere. Picked up by wire services, shared on social media, dissected by talking heads on cable news who pretended to understand what they were talking about. By 4, the FBI had issued a statement saying they were reviewing the allegations. By 5, Victor's lawyers had released a statement denying everything and threatening legal action against anyone who repeated the baseless accusations. By 6, 3 of Victor's remaining captains had been arrested on unrelated charges that would mysteriously lead back to the leaked files. And by 7, when Alessia and Francesca left for Pier 17, Victor Moretti's empire was in freefall. The pier was cold and dark when they arrived. The only light came from a few street lamps and the glow of the city skyline across the water. The meeting was set up in an old warehouse at the end of the pier, a place that had been abandoned for years but still had electricity and enough space for 12 very dangerous people to sit around a table and pretend they were running a legitimate business. Alicia walked in first, Francesca a step behind her, and immediately felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Carmelo was there, sitting at the head of the table like he'd been born to it. DeMarco was next to him, looking uncomfortable in a suit that was slightly too tight. The others were scattered around, some familiar faces, some she'd only met once or twice. Nobody spoke. Alessia took her seat at the opposite end of the table from Carmelo and waited. Finally, Carmelo broke the silence. You called this meeting, he said, so talk. Alessia folded her hands on the table. Victor Moretti is done. By the end of the week, he'll be in federal custody. His assets are being seized, his accounts are frozen, and everyone associated with him is being investigated. Murmurs around the table. A few people exchanged glances. And you know this how, Mistress? DeMarco asked. Because I made it happen. More murmurs, louder this time. Carmelo leaned back in his chair. You leaked the files. I did. Why? Because Victor was a liability. He was reckless, arrogant, and stupid. And liabilities get people killed. Including you, apparently, said one of the shipping magnates, a man named Laurent, who had an accent Alessia could never quite place. I heard there's a price on your head. There was. It's been handled. How? The person who put it there no longer has the resources to pay. Laurent raised an eyebrow. Victor? Alessia didn't answer, which was answer enough. DeMarco shifted in his seat. So what happens now? You take over? I already have. That got everyone's attention. I control the shipping routes, Alessia continued. I control the accounts. I control the infrastructure. Victor was just the face. I was always the foundation. And you want us to what? Laurent asked. Just accept that? I want you to recognize reality. Victor's empire is mine. It has been for years. The only difference now is that it's official. Carmelo watched her carefully. And if we don't accept it, then you'll find yourself on the wrong side of a federal investigation, just like Victor. The room went very, very quiet. You threatening us? One of the money launderers asked, a woman named Chen who'd built her fortune on being smarter than everyone else in the room. I'm offering you a choice, Alessia said. Work with me, and the transition is smooth. Fight me, and you'll lose. Bold words, Chen said. True words. Carmelo tapped his fingers on the table, a slow, deliberate rhythm. You've got balls, Alessia. I'll give you that. I don't need balls. I need results. And you think you can deliver them? I know I can. Carmelo looked around the table, gauging reactions. Then he looked back at Alicia. All right, he said. Let's say we go along with this. What's in it for us? Stability, efficiency, and profit margins that don't depend on Victor's temper. Specific numbers? Alessia pulled out a tablet and slid it across the table. On the screen was a detailed breakdown, projected revenue, cost reductions, new routes, expanded operations. Carmelo picked it up and scrolled through it. His eyebrows went up. This is real? It's conservative. He handed the tablet to DeMarco, who looked at it and whistled softly. She's not lying, DeMarco said. The tablet made its way around the table. By the time it reached Chen, the mood in the room had shifted. Less hostile, more curious. Chen studied the numbers for a long time, then looked up at Alessia. You really built all this while Victor was running around playing gangster? Yes. And he had no idea? None. Chen smiled, small but genuine. I like you. Laurent leaned forward. What about Margot Castellane? What about her? She backed Victor. That means she's got a stake in this. She did. She won't. How do you know? Because I gave her an option. Walk away or go down with him. And you think she'll walk? I think she's smart enough to recognize a losing hand. Laurent didn't look convinced, but he didn't argue. Carmelo set down the tablet and looked at Alessia. You've got 1 week to prove this works. If it does, we're in. If it doesn't, we're out. And you're on your own. That's fair. Good. He stood up. Meeting's over. One by one, the others filed out, some nodding at Alicia, some avoiding eye contact entirely. When the room was empty except for Alessia, Francesca, and Carmelo, the old man walked over and stopped in front of her. You know what you just did? He asked quietly. I took control. No. You declared war. Victor declared war when he put a price on my head. Maybe. But now everyone knows you're willing to burn the whole thing down to get what you want. That makes you dangerous. Good. Carmelo studied her for a moment, then shook his head. You're either the smartest person I've ever met or the most reckless. Maybe both. He almost smiled. Yeah, maybe. He turned and walked out, leaving Alessia and Francesca alone in the warehouse. Francesca exhaled slowly. That went better than I expected. It's not over yet. I know, but we're still alive. That's something. Alessia's phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. You win, I'm out. But we'll meet again, Alessia Moretti, and next time the terms will be different. Margot. Alessia deleted the message and put the phone away. She's out, Alessia said. Francesca looked relieved. One less problem. For now. They walked out of the warehouse together, into the cold night air. Across the water, the city glittered like broken glass, beautiful and dangerous and indifferent. Alessia stood there for a moment, just looking at it. Her city now. Or it would be soon enough. Victor Moretti was arrested on a Thursday morning. Not with fanfare. Not with SWAT teams bursting through doors or helicopters circling overhead. Just 4 FBI agents in dark suits who showed up at the apartment he'd been hiding in, a girlfriend's place in Brooklyn, someone new, younger than Delilah, and knocked politely. He didn't run. There was nowhere left to run. Alessia watched it happen on a news feed from her office. The footage was grainy, shot from someone's phone across the street, but she could see Victor clearly enough. His hands cuffed behind his back, his head down. The man who'd ruled through fear and volume reduced to a suspect doing a perp walk. Francesca stood beside her, arms crossed. You feel anything? No. Not even a little satisfaction? Alicia thought about it, really thought about it. No, she said again. I just feel tired. And she did. The kind of tired that lived in your bones and made everything feel heavier than it should. She'd been running on adrenaline and spite for so long that now, with Victor finally gone, she didn't know what to run on anymore. Francesca turned off the monitor. It's over. Not yet. Alessia? It's not over until it's stable. And stability took work. Over the next 3 days, Alessia moved through the empire like a surgeon repairing damage. She called every captain, every supplier, every contact Victor had alienated or ignored. She renegotiated deals. She smoothed over grudges. She made it clear that the chaos was ending and that she was the reason why. Most people accepted it. Some didn't. One of Victor's old lieutenants, a man named Brock, who had the build of a bouncer and the brain of a hammer, tried to make a play for independence. He took 2 warehouses and a crew of 6 guys who were loyal to him, not the organization. Alicia gave him 48 hours to reconsider. He didn't. So she made a call to Carmelo, who made a call to someone else. And by the end of the week, Brock was in a hospital with 2 broken legs and a very clear understanding that independence wasn't an option. Alicia didn't visit him. She didn't need to. The message was sent. By the end of the first week, the bleeding had stopped. Operations were running again, shipping routes reopened, product moving, money flowing. It wasn't perfect. There were gaps. There were inefficiencies that would take months to fix, but it was stable. And stability was control. On the 8th day, Alessia received a visitor she hadn't expected. She was in the penthouse, reviewing financial reports when the building's security called up. "Mrs. Moretti, there's someone here to see you." "I'm not expecting anyone." "She says her name is Delilah Crane." Alicia set down her pen. "Send her up." Francesca, who'd been working on her laptop at the kitchen counter, looked up. "Delilah? Victor's Delilah?" "Anam Isamaisa?" "Apparently. Why would she? I guess we're about to find out." The elevator opened 5 minutes later, and Delilah stepped into the penthouse like she was walking into a gallery opening, carefully, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to touch anything. She looked different than she had at the gala. Smaller, less polished. Her makeup was lighter, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, and she was wearing jeans and a sweater instead of the designer dress she'd worn when Victor kissed her in front of 200 people. She looked, Alessia thought, like someone who'd just realized the role they were playing didn't have a happy ending. "Mrs. Moretti," Delilah said. Her voice was quieter than Alessia remembered. "Delilah, I'm sorry to just show up like this. I know I probably shouldn't be here, but I didn't know who else to talk to." Alessia gestured to the couch. "Sit." Delilah sat. Francesca stayed at the counter, watching like a cat watches a mouse. "Why are you here?" Alessia asked. Delilah's hands twisted in her lap. "I wanted to apologize." "For what?" For everything. For the gala. For..." She stopped, took a breath. "For being stupid." Alessia didn't respond. She just waited. "I didn't know," Delilah continued. "About you. About what you were doing. Victor told me. He said you two were basically done. That it was just paperwork at that point. And you believed him. I wanted to believe him." Delilah looked up, and her eyes were red. Not crying, but close. I don't know what I thought. That he loved me. That I mattered. You didn't." It came out harsher than Alicia intended, but she didn't take it back. Delilah flinched, but nodded. "I know that now." "So why are you here?" "Because I wanted you to know that I'm sorry, and because..." She hesitated. "Because I wanted to ask if there was anything I could do to make it right." Alessia studied her. This girl who'd been a prop in Victor's performance, who'd probably thought being on his arm meant something more than just being decoration. "There's nothing to make right," Alessia said. "You were a distraction, that's all." "I know, but I still feel like I owe you something." "You don't." Delilah looked down at her hands again. "He's gone, isn't he? Victor?" "Yes." "For good?" "Yes." She nodded slowly, like she was processing something she'd already known but hadn't wanted to accept. "I saw him," Delilah said quietly. "A few days before he got arrested. He called me. Said he needed to see me. I thought, I don't know. I thought maybe he wanted to apologize or explain or something." "Did he?" "No, he just wanted money. Said he was putting together something big, that he needed cash to make it happen." She laughed, but it was a broken sound. "I gave him $5,000, everything I had saved, and he took it, and I never heard from him again." Alessia didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. Delilah stood up. I should go. I wanted you to know I was sorry for being part of it, for being naive, Alessia finished. Delilah smiled sadly. Yeah, that. She walked toward the elevator, then stopped and turned back. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. How did you do it? How did you take everything from him without him even seeing it coming? Alicia thought about the question, about the years of planning, the patience, the quiet work that nobody noticed because they were too busy watching Victor make noise. I paid attention, Alessia said, and I remembered that power isn't about being loud, it's about being necessary. Delilah nodded like she understood, even though Alessia suspected she didn't. Not really. Then she left. When the elevator doors closed, Francesca walked over. That was unexpected. Yes. You think she meant it? The apology? Does it matter? Francesca shrugged. I guess not. But it did matter, in a way, because Delilah's apology was just another reminder that Victor's empire had been built on people who didn't understand what they were part of, people who thought proximity to power meant they had power. Alessia had never made that mistake. 2 weeks after Victor's arrest, Alessia received word that he'd taken a plea deal, 20 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole for at least 12. His lawyers had tried to fight it, but the evidence was overwhelming. The leaked files, the testimony from drivers who'd flipped, the paper trail that connected him to money laundering, racketeering, and half a dozen other charges that carried sentences longer than most people's careers. Victor had run out of moves, and in the end, he'd done exactly what Alessia had predicted. He'd tried to take people down with him. He'd given the FBI names, locations, details about deals and shipments and bribes. But most of the people he named had already insulated themselves, or disappeared, or had enough lawyers to make prosecution impossible. Victor's cooperation didn't save him. It just made him a snitch. Alessia didn't go to the sentencing. She didn't need to see him broken and defeated in a courtroom. That wasn't closure. That was just theater. Instead, she spent the day reorganizing the logistics network, streamlining routes, cutting overhead, making the empire better than Victor ever could have. That night, she stood alone in the penthouse, looking out at the city. It was late, past midnight, and the lights below had thinned out to just the insomniacs and the night shift workers and the people who didn't have anywhere better to be. She'd won. Victor was gone. The empire was hers. The captains had fallen in line. The money was flowing. Everything she'd worked for had come together exactly the way she'd planned. So why did she feel so empty? The door opened behind her. Francesca. You should be asleep, Francesca said. So should you. Francesca came to stand beside her at the window. They stood in silence for a while, just watching the city breathe. Do you regret it? Francesca asked. Which part? Any of it. Alessia thought about the question. About the years she'd spent building something Victor had taken credit for. About the sacrifices, the compromises, the version of herself she'd buried so deep she wasn't sure it existed anymore. No, she said finally, I don't regret it. But I don't know what comes next. Francesca looked at her. What do you mean? I spent 7 years working toward this, taking control, making sure Victor couldn't destroy what I built, and now he's gone. The empire is stable. The threat is over. She paused, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. Francesca was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You could walk away. Alessia almost laughed. Walk away? Yeah, you've got the money. You've got the resources. You could disappear, start over somewhere else, be someone else. I don't know how to be someone else. Then maybe it's time to learn. Alicia looked at her sister. Is that what you want, for me to walk away? I want you to be happy, Francesca said. And I don't think this... She gestured at the penthouse, at the city beyond the windows. I don't think this makes you happy. It's not about happiness. Then what's it about? Alessia didn't have an answer, because the truth was she'd spent so long focused on survival, on control, on winning, that she'd forgotten to ask herself what she actually wanted. The empire had been a necessity, a shield, a way to protect herself from men like Victor who thought they could take whatever they wanted. But now that she had it, now that she'd won, she didn't know what to do with it. "I need some air," Alessia said. She grabbed her coat and left. The streets were quieter at this hour. Alessia walked without direction, just moving, letting her feet take her wherever they wanted to go. She ended up at a small park, one of those forgotten green spaces tucked between buildings where nobody went except dog walkers and people who needed to think. She sat on a bench and pulled her coat tighter against the cold. A woman jogged past, earbuds in, focused on her run. A homeless man slept on a bench across the path, covered in blankets that had seen better decades. A couple walked by, holding hands, laughing about something Alicia couldn't hear. Normal people, living normal lives. Alessia wondered what that felt like. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. Hundreds of names. Business associates, captains, fixers, lawyers. Not a single person she could call just to talk. She put the phone away. When she got back to the penthouse, Francesca was still awake, sitting on the couch with a glass of wine. "You okay?" Francesca asked. "I don't know." "That's honest." Alessia sat down beside her. "Do you remember when we were kids, before Dad died?" "Yeah." "Do you remember what he used to say about power?" Francesca smiled slightly. "He used to say power was like fire. It could keep you warm or burn your house down depending on how you used it." "I think I burned my house down." Francesca set down her wine glass. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I got what I wanted. I took control. I won. And now I'm sitting in an empire I built, surrounded by people who are afraid of me or need something from me. And I don't have a single person I trust. You trust me. You're my sister. That's different." Francesca didn't argue. Alessia leaned back against the couch. "I thought taking control would fix things, that it would make me safe, that I'd finally have power over my own life. And I do. I have power. I have control. I have everything I worked for." She paused. "And I've never felt more alone." Francesca reached over and took her hand. "Then maybe it's time to change that." "How?" "I don't know, but you're the smartest person I know. If anyone can figure it out, it's you." Alessia looked at her sister, the only person left in the world who knew her before she became this. "I'm tired, Francesca." "I know. I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of planning 3 moves ahead. I'm tired of being the person everyone's afraid of." "Then stop. It's not that simple." "Why not?" Alicia didn't have an answer for that. Over the next month, Alessia made changes. Small ones at first. She delegated more. Let Carmelo and the other captains handle day-to-day operations. Stepped back from the constant micromanaging that had defined her takeover. The empire didn't collapse. In fact, it ran smoother, because the truth was, she'd built something that didn't need her constant attention. She'd built systems, processes, a machine that could run itself. She'd been necessary for so long that she'd forgotten how to be anything else. But necessity, she was learning, wasn't the same as fulfillment. She started taking mornings for herself, walking through the city without purpose, sitting in coffee shops and just watching people, reading books that had nothing to do with business or strategy or survival. Francesca noticed. "You seem different," Francesca said one evening. "Different how?" I don't know. Less like you're about to fight someone." Alessia smiled slightly. "I'm trying something new." "What's that?" "Not fighting." It was harder than it sounded, because the instinct to control, to plan, to stay 3 steps ahead, that didn't just disappear. It was wired into her now. A reflex. But she was trying. 3 months after Victor's sentencing, Alessia made a decision. She called a meeting with Carmelo, DeMarco, and the other senior captains. They met at a restaurant this time, somewhere public, somewhere normal. When everyone was seated, Alessia stood up. "I'm stepping back," she said. The table went silent. "What do you mean, stepping back?" Carmelo asked. "I mean I'm removing myself from day-to-day operations. You'll report to a council, Carmelo, DeMarco, Laurent, and Chen. Major decisions get voted on. I'll remain an advisor, but I won't be running things anymore." DeMarco frowned. "Why?" "Because I built this to survive, not to live." Alessia looked around the table. And I'm done just surviving. Carmelo leaned back in his chair, studying her. You sure about this? Yes. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. Laurent crossed his arms. And if things fall apart without you? They won't. I built this too well for that. Chen smiled, confident. Realistic. The vote was unanimous, not because they wanted her gone, but because they respected her enough to let her go. 6 months later, Alessia Moretti sat in a small apartment in Barcelona. It wasn't much, just 2 rooms and a balcony that overlooked a street full of cafes and tourists and locals who had no idea who she was. She'd sold the penthouse, liquidated most of her holdings, kept enough to live comfortably, but not extravagantly. Francesca had stayed behind to help manage the transition. They talked every week, sometimes more. Alessia spent her days learning Spanish, taking photography classes, walking through markets and parks and neighborhoods she'd never have noticed before. She was anonymous here, and for the first time in her adult life, that felt like freedom. One afternoon, she sat at a cafe with a cup of coffee and a book she was only half reading. Across the street, a couple argued loudly, their voices carrying over the noise of traffic. A kid on a skateboard nearly crashed into a fruit stand. An old man fed pigeons from a bench. Normal chaos. The kind that had nothing to do with empires or power or control. Alessia's phone buzzed. Text from Francesca. The council voted to expand into new territory. Thought you'd want to know. Alessia typed back. Good for them. You really don't care? Alessia thought about the question. A year ago, she would have cared. She would have needed to know every detail, every risk, every angle. But now? I care that they're making smart decisions, but it's not my fight anymore. Francesca sent back a heart emoji. Alessia set down her phone and went back to her coffee. It was still hot, still bitter, but it tasted better than it used to. That night, she stood on her balcony, looking out at the city. Barcelona wasn't New York. It was smaller, warmer, older in ways that made New York look like a teenager pretending to be an adult. She thought about Victor, about where he was now, probably in a cell somewhere, counting days. She thought about Margot Castellane, about whether their paths would cross again. She thought about the empire she'd built and then walked away from. And she realized something. She'd spent so long trying to prove she was strong enough to survive in a world that wanted to break her that she'd forgotten to ask if that world was worth surviving in. Power hadn't made her happy. Control hadn't made her free. It had just made her alone. But here, in this small apartment in a city where nobody knew her name, she was starting to feel something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. It wasn't perfect. She still had nightmares sometimes. Still looked over her shoulder out of habit. Still felt the pull of old instincts telling her to plan, to control, to stay ahead. But she was learning to quiet those instincts, learning to just be. And maybe that was the real victory. Not taking the empire, but learning to let it go. She stayed on the balcony until the sun set and the streetlights came on and the city below shifted into its nighttime rhythm. And for the first time in 7 years, Alessia Moretti felt like she could breathe. She'd become the queen. And then she'd walked away from the throne. Because in the end, she'd learned that the only person she needed to rule was herself.